When I first moved into my lakeside cabin, I thought I had finally found peace. The property was something I had inherited from my late grandfather, a quiet retreat tucked along the shores of Willow Bend Lake. The lake itself was calm, surrounded by tall pines and oak trees, with the kind of stillness that seemed to press against your ears until all you could hear was the call of loons in the distance. My grandfather had always told me, "This lake is our bloodline. Never let anyone take it from you." At the time, I never really understood what he meant. It wasn't long after I settled in that a knock came on my door. Standing outside was a woman in her mid-50s with sharp features, a tight bun that looked painful, and an expression that screamed self-importance. She introduced herself as Karen, president of the Willow Bend Homeowners Association. "Hello," she said with a saccharine smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm here to welcome you to the neighborhood and provide you with the paperwork to join our HOA." I took the packet she shoved into my hands, skimmed the front page, and frowned. "I think you're mistaken," I said. "My property isn't part of any HOA." Her smile faltered, replaced quickly by a frown. "Oh, every homeowner around the lake is required to join. It's for community upkeep and lake preservation. We all chip in. It's mandatory." I shook my head. "Not me. My grandfather's land predates the HOA. We're independent." Karen's jaw tightened. "Well, that won't do. We'll need to sort this out. It's in everyone's best interest if you just comply." That was my first encounter with Karen, and I could already tell she was trouble. Chapter 2. The pressure campaign. Over the next few weeks, the HOA began bombarding me with letters. Each envelope was stamped with bold red words, "Notice of Noncompliance." They demanded dues, threatened fines, and even claimed I'd be denied lake privileges if I didn't join. Lake privileges? That was rich. My property wasn't just on the lake. According to the deed, my family actually owned the lake itself, a fact I had only recently rediscovered when going through my grandfather's old files. Apparently, decades ago, he had purchased not only the cabin but also the entirety of Willow Bend Lake from a timber company that went bankrupt. For years, nobody had contested it because my grandfather never flaunted his ownership. He let people use the water freely, fish when they wanted, even built a small public dock. Now, Karen and her HOA were trying to bully me into submission. One afternoon, she appeared again, this time flanked by 2 board members. They marched up my driveway like they were serving an eviction notice. "You're creating problems," Karen said bluntly. "Everyone else pays their dues. Everyone else follows the rules. Why do you think you're special?" "Because my land is separate," I answered calmly. "I'm not part of your HOA, and I'm not paying for your pool maintenance or flower beds." Her eyes narrowed. "Then don't expect to use the lake." I laughed. "Lady, I don't need your permission to use the lake." Her face turned crimson. She didn't know it yet, but she had just challenged the one thing she had no control over. Chapter 3. Escalation. It started with petty harassment. My mailbox was knocked down twice. Anonymous complaints were filed to the county about illegal fishing activities. I even found HOA flyers stapled to the trees on my property, warning non-members that they were trespassing. But Karen wasn't satisfied with intimidation. She wanted a public spectacle. One Saturday morning, I was out on my small aluminum boat, casting a line into the calm waters. The mist was still rolling off the surface, the world quiet except for the plunk of my lure. That's when I heard sirens. By the time I got back to shore, 2 police cruisers were parked at the end of my driveway. Karen was there, arms folded smugly across her chest, surrounded by a cluster of curious neighbors. "That's him," she declared, pointing at me. "He's trespassing on HOA property. Arrest him." I couldn't help but laugh. Trespassing? On my own lake? The officer looked confused. "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" Without a word, I went inside, grabbed the deed, and handed it over. The officer's eyebrows shot up as he read the document. "According to this, you own the entire lake?" Karen's jaw dropped. "That's impossible. The HOA controls the lake." The officer shook his head. "Ma'am, it says right here, the lake and all its water rights belong to him." He handed the deed back to me and gave her a stern look. "You can't call in false reports. Consider this a warning." Karen sputtered, but the crowd of neighbors was already murmuring. Her big dramatic play had just blown up in her face. Chapter 4. The fallout news spread quickly. Within days, everyone in the community knew the truth. The HOA had no authority over the lake. In fact, technically, every dock, boat, and fishing trip had been happening at my family's generosity. Some neighbors approached me nervously, asking if they could still use the water. I assured them nothing would change. I wasn't about to punish innocent people for Karen's power trip. My grandfather had believed in sharing the lake, and I intended to honor that. But for Karen, it was a crushing defeat. She doubled down, insisting that the HOA could sue me, that their bylaws superseded personal ownership. She even tried to host a meeting where she ranted about rogue property owners undermining community harmony. Nobody showed up. I had become something of a local hero overnight. People waved to me when I drove by, slipped me thank you notes, even offered me fresh-baked pies. For years, they had been afraid of Karen and her board, but now they realized she wasn't invincible. Chapter 5. Checkmate. The final blow came when Karen tried one last desperate move. She attempted to fine me for illegal use of HOA waters. I responded with a certified letter that included copies of the lake deed, a legal notice that her fines had no jurisdiction over my property, and a gentle reminder that continued harassment would result in a lawsuit for damages. A week later, the HOA board dissolved. Karen was forced to resign. I still see her sometimes, skulking past my property, glaring at me from across the water. But she doesn't say a word anymore. Now, when I sit on my porch at sunset, watching the lake shimmer gold, I finally understand what my grandfather meant. The lake wasn't just water. It was freedom, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it away. When I first moved into my grandfather's lakeside cabin, I had no idea how much drama would come with it. The cabin itself was old but solid, built from thick logs that had weathered decades of storms. It stood at the northern edge of Willow Bend Lake, surrounded by tall pines and oaks that seemed to whisper secrets whenever the wind passed through them. For me, the cabin represented peace. I had just left a fast-paced job in the city and was looking forward to fishing, reading, and enjoying the kind of quiet most people only dream about. My grandfather always said the lake was special. Before he passed away, he left me the property along with a thick envelope full of old deeds, maps, and legal papers. At the time, I didn't pay much attention. To me, it was just paperwork. I didn't know then that inside those documents was a secret that would later turn my life upside down. In the first few weeks, I spent my time fixing up the place, repainting the deck, patching the roof, and clearing some fallen branches. The locals seemed friendly enough whenever I went into town. A few neighbors waved at me as I drove by, though I noticed some were more curious than welcoming. I brushed it off, assuming they just weren't used to new faces around the lake. But then one afternoon, I got a knock on the door that would change everything. Chapter 2. Enter Karen. Standing on my porch was a woman with sharp features and an even sharper attitude. She wore a pastel cardigan over a collared shirt, her hair tied up in a bun so tight it looked painful. The way she stood, with her hands clasped and chin lifted, gave off the air of someone who believed she was in charge. "Hello," she said sweetly, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Karen, president of the Willow Bend Lake Homeowners Association. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood and provide your membership paperwork." She handed me a thick folder stuffed with documents. I opened the first page, skimming over phrases like mandatory dues, bylaws, and lake access restrictions. "I think there's been a mistake," I told her. "My property isn't part of any HOA." Karen's smile wavered. "Oh no, every home around the lake is required to join. It's how we keep things orderly. We all chip in to preserve the lake and community. It's mandatory." "Not mine," I said firmly. "This land's been in my family for generations. My grandfather never mentioned any HOA." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "Well, we'll see about that. It's in everyone's best interest if you just comply. Things go much smoother when everyone works together." I thanked her politely, closed the door, and tossed the packet on the counter. I didn't know it yet, but I had just made myself Karen's #1 enemy. Chapter 3. The pressure campaign. The following week, I started receiving letters. Each envelope had bold red text across the front, notice of non-compliance. Inside were threats of fines, warnings about losing lake privileges, and reminders that community rules are not optional. Lake privileges? That phrase made me laugh. My grandfather had told me years ago that we owned the northern section of the shoreline. But when I dug out the old deeds from his envelope, I realized the truth was far more surprising. My family didn't just own a piece of the shore. We owned the entire lake. Apparently, decades earlier, my grandfather had purchased the lake outright from a bankrupt timber company. The deed included water rights, shoreline rights, and even fishing rights. It was all legal and still valid. My grandfather, being the generous man he was, had never restricted access. He let the community use the water freely, and nobody had ever questioned it. Until now. Karen, of course, had no idea. To her, I was just another homeowner refusing to follow her precious rules. And she wasn't about to let that slide. Chapter 4. Harassment begins. Things escalated quickly. My mailbox was knocked down twice in 1 week. Flyers appeared on trees near my cabin with messages like, "Non-members will be prosecuted for trespassing." Someone even filed an anonymous complaint to the county about me running illegal fishing operations. It was obvious who was behind it all. Karen wasn't just trying to pressure me into joining the HOA. She was trying to make my life miserable until I caved. One Saturday morning, I was out on my small aluminum boat, enjoying the stillness of the water. The mist hovered above the surface, and the only sounds were the chirps of birds and the soft splash of my lure hitting the water. That peace didn't last long. Sirens echoed from the road. By the time I returned to shore, 2 police cruisers were parked at the end of my driveway. Karen stood there with her arms crossed, a smug smile plastered on her face, surrounded by a cluster of curious neighbors. "That's him," she shouted, pointing at me. "He's trespassing on HOA property. Arrest him." Chapter 5. The reveal. The officers looked at me, then at Karen. "Sir," one said, "do you have proof of ownership?" Without a word, I walked into the cabin, grabbed the deed, and returned. I handed it over, and the officer's eyebrows shot up as he read. "This says you own the entire lake?" Karen's face went pale. "That's impossible. The HOA controls the lake." The officer shook his head.
"No, ma'am.
"According to this document, he's the legal owner. You can't file false reports like this. Consider this a warning." Karen sputtered, trying to argue, but the murmurs from the crowd of neighbors drowned her out. For the first time, they were realizing that everything they thought about the lake's ownership was a lie. I thanked the officers, who left shortly after. Karen, however, stormed away, her plan having backfired spectacularly. Chapter 6. The fallout word spread quickly. By the end of the week, everyone knew that I owned Willowbend Lake. People who had once ignored me now waved when I drove by. Some even knocked on my door to ask if they could still use the water. I assured them nothing would change. "I'm not here to restrict anyone," I explained. "My grandfather always believed the lake should be shared, and I feel the same way." This earned me more goodwill, but it also deepened Karen's rage. She began holding emergency HOA meetings, ranting about rogue property owners undermining community harmony. She claimed their bylaws superseded individual ownership, which made most people roll their eyes. Attendance at her meetings dwindled until only a few die-hard loyalists showed up. For years, Karen had ruled the neighborhood with fear, threatening fines, issuing citations, and making everyone feel like they owed her something. Now, her power was slipping away, and she hated me for it. Chapter 7. Checkmate. Karen's final attempt came in the form of a certified letter. Inside was a fine for illegal use of HOA waters. The absurdity of it made me laugh out loud. I responded with my own certified letter, enclosing a copy of the lake deed and a legal notice stating that any further harassment would result in a lawsuit for damages. I also added a polite reminder. Every time you or your board members use the lake, you are doing so at my discretion. That was the nail in the coffin. Within a month, several board members resigned, citing irreconcilable differences. The HOA's influence collapsed, and eventually the organization dissolved entirely. Karen, stripped of her power, became a pariah. I still saw her sometimes, glaring at me from across the water, but she never said a word again. Chapter 8. The legacy of the lake. One evening, I sat on the porch with a cold drink in hand, watching the sun set over the shimmering water. The golden reflection rippled across the lake, and for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. I thought of my grandfather and his words. This lake is our bloodline. Never let anyone take it from you. Now, I finally understood what he meant. It wasn't just about property rights or ownership. It was about protecting something that mattered, something pure that people like Karen would gladly ruin for power. I smiled, knowing I had defended not only my family's legacy, but also the freedom of every neighbor who loved the lake. And as long as I was around, no one, HOA or otherwise, was ever going to take that away. When I moved into my lakeside home, I wasn't looking for trouble. All I wanted was a quiet retreat where I could fish at sunrise, watch the herons glide over the water, and breathe in air that wasn't saturated with car exhaust. The cabin had belonged to my father before me, and he used to say, "This dock is where you'll find your soul." At the time, I didn't understand what he meant, but once I set foot back on those weathered planks, I felt it, the sense of belonging, the pull of memories tied to the water. The lake wasn't just property to me, it was part of my family story. My grandfather had been one of the men who helped dredge it when the valley was first developed. He told me tales of hauling timber, blasting rocks, and carving out the basin that would one day fill with spring water. "We didn't just build a lake," he said. "We built a way of life." What I didn't realize, however, was that my return would put me directly in the crosshairs of the most controlling person I'd ever met, HOA President Karen. Chapter 2. Karen's introduction. Karen showed up on my second day at the cabin. I was sitting on the porch drinking coffee when a white SUV rolled into my driveway without so much as a honk. Out stepped a woman in her 50s, dressed in expensive yoga pants and oversized sunglasses. She carried a clipboard like it was a weapon. "You must be the new occupant," she said, not bothering to smile.
I'm Karen.
"I run the Willow Shores Homeowners Association. I need to go over some rules with you." I raised an eyebrow. "Rules? This is my property." She clicked her pen aggressively. "This community operates under HOA bylaws. You'll need to sign membership forms, pay annual dues, and comply with dock regulations. Your dock, for example, does not meet current standards." I looked past her at the dock my grandfather and father had built. It was sturdy, wide enough for 2 boats, and had stood through storms that ripped apart newer docks. "That dock has been here for 50 years, I told her. "It doesn't need your approval." Karen pursed her lips. "If it's not compliant, it has to go. I'll give you 30 days to remove it." That was my first taste of what she was capable of. Chapter 3. The paper war. Within a week, the letters began arriving. Each one bore the HOA's letterhead and threatened fines. Non-compliant dock structure. Unauthorized shoreline modifications. Failure to remit dues. I ignored them at first, thinking they would tire of sending nonsense once they realized I wasn't going to play along. But the letters only grew more aggressive. They claimed I could be denied lake access, barred from parking in the community lot, even have my property liened. What Karen didn't know was that my family's property predated the HOA entirely. When the development was built around the lake in the 1970s, my father refused to sign away his rights. Our deeds specifically exempted us from HOA jurisdiction. In fact, the original survey maps showed that a portion of the lake bed itself technically belonged to us. Karen wasn't just overreaching, she was trespassing on ground she had no authority over. Chapter 4. Harassment escalates. The harassment turned physical soon after. Someone spray-painted "Remove the dock" across my fence. My trash cans were knocked over repeatedly. Late one night, I saw if they carried out her dirty work. One morning, I found a notice nailed directly to the dock itself. It declared the structure condemned and warned that continued use will result in enforcement action. The notice was signed, of course, by Karen. That was the final straw. Chapter 5. The police showdown. The next weekend, I decided to enjoy my dock anyway. I cast my fishing line into the water, poured myself a coffee, and let the sun warm my back. Around noon, a police cruiser pulled up near my property. And who should step out of a nearby car but Karen herself, arms folded, face smug. "That's him, officer," she barked. "He's violating community regulations. That dock is illegal, and he refuses to comply." The officer approached me cautiously. "Sir, we've had a complaint about a non-compliant dock structure." I smiled, stood up, and pulled a folder from my tackle box. Inside were copies of my deed, survey maps, and a letter from the county zoning office confirming that my property and dock were outside HOA jurisdiction. The officer flipped through the papers, then looked at Karen. Ma'am, his property predates your HOA. He's not under your authority. You can't call us for private disputes. Karen's jaw dropped. That can't be right. Everyone is under HOA rules. Not him, the officer said flatly. If you keep filing false reports, you could be cited. Karen's face turned red with fury, but she had no choice but to leave. Chapter 6. The backlash word spread quickly after that. Neighbors who had been quietly resentful of Karen's control started approaching me. One man confided that Karen fined him $200 for having the wrong shade of curtains. Another said she threatened to tow his truck for parking too close to the curb. They were tired of her. My stand against the HOA gave them courage. People began skipping meetings, refusing to pay fines, even questioning the legality of certain bylaws. Karen tried to rally her loyalists, but the tide had turned. Her threats didn't scare anyone anymore, not after I had proven she had no real power over me. Chapter 7. Karen's last stand desperate. Karen filed a civil complaint in small claims court, demanding I remove my dock. She strutted into the courtroom with her clipboard, confident she'd win. But when it was my turn, I handed the judge my deed, survey maps, and a notarized statement from the original developer confirming my family's exemption. The judge barely glanced at Karen before dismissing her complaint. Ma'am, you have no jurisdiction over this property. Case dismissed. The sound of the gavel was like thunder. Karen stormed out of the courtroom, muttering about community betrayal. Chapter 8. Freedom restored after her defeat. Karen resigned as HOA president. The board dissolved within months. Without her iron grip, neighbors began repainting their houses the colors they actually liked. Kids played basketball in driveways without fear of fines. Life around the lake became brighter, freer. As for me, I still fish off my dock every morning. The planks creak under my boots, the water shimmers, and I think of my father and grandfather. They fought to keep this place in the family, to keep it free from petty tyrants, and I had honored that legacy. Sometimes, I see Karen driving past in her white SUV, glaring at me. But she no longer has the power to do anything. The dock stands tall, stronger than her rules ever were. And every time I cast my line into the water, I smile, knowing that some things are worth fighting for. The first time I drove back to my grandfather's property after inheriting it, I felt like I was driving through time. The long dirt road wound between pine trees, branches arching overhead like a green cathedral. At the end of the road, the forest opened up into a clearing, and there it was, the lake. Smooth, silver, and stretching out wide beneath the afternoon sun. My grandfather's old cabin sat just 50 feet from the shore, its logs weathered but strong, the dock stretching out like an arm reaching into the water. I parked, stepped out, and just stood there for a moment, breathing in the air. The lake smelled the same as it had when I was a kid visiting every summer, fresh, a little earthy, with that faint tang of fish and pine needles. Memories washed over me. Fishing with Grandpa at dawn, swimming with cousins, roasting marshmallows by the fire pit. Back then, it had always felt like our own private paradise. But now, as I would soon learn, not everyone saw it that way. Chapter 2. The knock on the door. I hadn't been in the cabin more than a week when I heard a knock on the door. Standing outside was a woman in her 50s, dressed like she was going to a country club rather than walking through dirt roads. She had neatly styled hair, pearl earrings, and an expression that said she owned the world. "Hello," she said, holding out a clipboard. "I'm Karen, president of the Willowbend Lake Homeowners Association. I need to discuss your obligations as a resident." I frowned. Obligations? "Yes," she said briskly. "Membership in the HOA is mandatory. We maintain the community grounds, regulate lake usage, and ensure everyone follows the rules. You'll need to sign these forms, pay your dues, and comply with lake access regulations." I chuckled. "Sorry, I think you've got the wrong person. My property isn't part of your HOA." Karen's smile froze. "Every home around this lake is part of the HOA. It's mandatory. Nobody gets special treatment. My grandfather built this cabin before your HOA even existed," I replied. "It's not in your jurisdiction. I have the deed to prove it." Her eyes narrowed, her smile slipping into a sneer. "We'll see about that." Chapter 3. The harassment begins. Within days, I started receiving letters. Notice of noncompliance. Failure to pay dues. unauthorized use of community property. Each one demanded money, threatened fines, or warned me that my lake privileges would be revoked. Lake privileges? That was laughable. My grandfather's deed clearly showed that not only did he own the cabin and the land it sat on, but also a significant portion of the shoreline, including the section where the HOA had recently built their community dock. The irony was delicious. Technically, they had built part of their dock on my land. Still, the harassment continued. My mailbox was knocked down twice. One morning, I found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door, warning me that I was trespassing on HOA property by using my own dock. Karen was clearly escalating. Chapter 4. Confrontation at the shore. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. I was sitting on my dock, fishing pole in hand, when I heard the sound of voices behind me. Turning around, I saw Karen marching down the path with two HOA board members in tow. "There he is," Karen snapped. "Fishing without a permit. That's a violation." "A violation of what?" I asked calmly. "HOA bylaws," she said, crossing her arms. "This dock is illegal. You're banned from using the lake until you join the association and bring everything into compliance." I couldn't help but laugh. "Karen, you're standing on my shoreline. According to the deed, I own this land and a portion of the lake bed itself. Your bylaws don't mean anything here." Her face went red. "That's impossible. The HOA controls this lake." "Not this part," I said, pulling out my phone and opening a photo of the deed. "See this line? That's the property boundary, which means you've been trespassing for years with that so-called community dock." The board members exchanged nervous glances. Karen sputtered, searching for words, before finally shouting, "We'll see what the sheriff has to say about this." Chapter 5. The sheriff arrived. Sure enough, 2 days later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled into my driveway. Karen was right behind him, grinning like she'd already won. "Officer," she said, pointing at me, "this man is refusing to comply with HOA regulations. He's trespassing on community property." The sheriff turned to me. "Do you have proof of ownership, sir?" Wordlessly, I handed him the deed. He studied it carefully, flipping through the pages. Then he looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, according to this deed, the shoreline and dock are on his property. And part of the lake bed belongs to him too." Karen's face went white. "That can't be right." "It is," the sheriff said firmly. "This is a civil matter, not criminal. And if you keep calling in false reports, you could be charged for misuse of emergency services." I tried not to smirk as Karen stormed back to her SUV, fuming. Chapter 6. Community rebellion. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had lived in fear of Karen for years began approaching me. One man told me she fined him $150 for leaving his trash cans out too long. Another said she threatened to tow his boat for being unsightly. People were tired of her constant power trips. Honestly, one neighbor whispered to me, "We've been hoping someone would stand up to her. She bullies everyone. Maybe now she'll finally back off." I became something of a local hero overnight. Folks waved to me as I drove past. A few even brought over baked goods as thanks. Karen, however, doubled down. She called emergency meetings, ranted about rogue property owners, and even tried to push for a lawsuit against me. But the cracks in her control were obvious. Attendance at her meetings dropped. People ignored her emails. The spell was breaking. Chapter 7. The lawsuit. In a last-ditch effort, Karen filed a civil lawsuit demanding I remove my dock and pay back dues. She strutted into court with her clipboard, her lawyer by her side, radiating smug confidence. But when it was my turn, I presented the deed, survey maps, and even testimony from the county recorder's office confirming my exemption. The judge didn't take long. "Ma'am, this property predates your HOA. Your claims are without merit. Case dismissed." The gavel slammed. Karen's face went red, then purple. She stormed out of the courtroom muttering about ungrateful neighbors. It was over. Chapter 8. A new era. After Karen's defeat, the HOA crumbled. Several board members resigned, neighbors stopped paying dues, and within months, the association was dissolved. The community was free for the first time in decades. Life around the lake changed almost overnight. Kids played basketball in their driveways without fear of fines. Families painted their houses whatever colors they liked. People laughed more, smiled more, lived more. As for me, I still fish from my dock every morning. The planks creak beneath my boots, the water shimmers, and the loons call across the lake. Sometimes, I think about my grandfather and how proud he would be that I defended his legacy. Every so often, I still see Karen driving past in her white SUV, glaring at me. But she doesn't stop. She can't. Because in the end, the lake isn't hers. It never was. It's mine. When I moved into Willow Creek, I thought it was the perfect place to start over. The neighborhood looked peaceful, with neat lawns, tall oaks lining the streets, and a small park at the center. I had just left a stressful job and wanted quiet nights and calm mornings. With me came my German Shepherd, Rex. He wasn't just a pet. He was a retired police canine, trained, disciplined, and loyal to the bone. On our first day, I noticed people staring when I walked him. Some looked impressed. Others looked uneasy. Rex was large, muscular, with sharp eyes that seemed to read, or acted aggressive. He was better trained than most people's children. I thought nothing of it, until Karen showed up. Chapter 2. The first complaint. Karen introduced herself the same way she probably introduced herself to everyone, like she owned the place. She was president of the Willow Creek HOA, and she wasted no time letting me know it. That dog, she said, pointing at Rex, is a danger to the community. Large breeds aren't permitted in our neighborhood without prior approval. I raised an eyebrow. This isn't a pit bull banned state. He's a service-trained K9. Perfectly legal. Karen sniffed. Legal or not, the HOA has rules. Rules keep people safe. You'll need to remove him or face fines. I laughed, thinking she had to be joking. Not happening. Rex isn't going anywhere. Karen's smile turned thin and sharp. We'll see about that. Chapter 3. The harassment. The next few weeks turned into a war of petty harassment. I started receiving HOA violation notices in my mailbox. Unauthorized animal on premises. Failure to register pet. Endangerment to community safety. One morning, I even found a sign staked in my front yard. Aggressive dog warning. Rex, meanwhile, did nothing to justify their fear. He sat calmly on the porch, wagged his tail when kids walked by, and only barked if a stranger tried to sneak too close at night. He was the best watchdog I could ask for, but he wasn't a menace. Still, Karen wasn't satisfied. Chapter 4. The breaking point. It all came to a head one evening when Karen brought 2 HOA board members and marched up my driveway. Rex was lying on the porch, tail thumping lazily against the boards. That animal needs to go, Karen demanded. You're violating community rules. We voted, and we're fining you $500 a week until he's removed. I crossed my arms. You don't get to vote my dog out of my house. Show me where in the deed it says you control what animals I keep. Go on, I'll wait. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Karen glared at them, then back at me. You'll regret this. I'll call animal control. Maybe even the cops. He's a threat. I looked at Rex, who yawned and rested his head on his paws. The only threat here, Karen, is your ego. Chapter 5. The showdown. A week later, it happened. I woke to the sound of cars pulling into my driveway. Animal control, 2 police cruisers, and Karen, of course, standing proudly with her arms folded. That's him, she shouted as the officers approached. The dangerous dog. He lunged at me just yesterday. I knew it was a lie. Rex hadn't left the porch all day. The officers looked at Rex, who sat calmly beside me, ears perked but tail wagging slightly. I handed them Rex's certification papers, proof of training, and even his commendation medals from his years of service. This dog, I explained, is a retired K9 officer. He's more disciplined than most people. And according to county law, the HOA has no authority over him. The officers examined the papers, then gave Karen a hard look. Ma'am, this dog is perfectly legal. Filing false reports is a serious offense. Karen's mouth fell open. But he's dangerous. The officer shook his head. The only dangerous thing here is wasting police resources. They packed up and left, leaving Karen standing in my driveway, humiliated. Chapter 6. The aftermath. Word of what happened spread fast. Neighbors who had been silent before started approaching me, many of them whispering stories of their own run-ins with Karen. One said she fined him for having the wrong color mailbox. Another said she threatened to ban his daughter's lemonade stand. They were tired of her. My stand against her nonsense gave them courage. Within months, several homeowners petitioned to remove her from the HOA board. She fought tooth and nail, but the vote was overwhelming. Karen was out. Chapter 7. Peace restored now. Evenings at Willow Creek are calm again. Kids ride bikes past my house, and Rex lies on the porch, tail wagging as they wave. Neighbors stop to scratch his ears, no longer afraid. Every so often, I catch Karen driving past, glaring from behind her wheel. But she doesn't stop. She can't. Rex still sits proudly by my side, a symbol of loyalty and strength. And every time I look at him, I think, in the end, it wasn't just about keeping my dog. It was about standing up to people who think rules make them rulers. And on that front, Rex and I won together.